Another day, another thrilling Winnipeg Jets win, this time in overtime against a very pesky Seattle Kraken squad, 4-3 in overtime. Find out how the Jets pulled it off on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we're talking about takeaways from Winnipeg versus Seattle. A very close game, one that I think went very back and forth and had some stretches where the Jets were playing well and stretches where Seattle was playing well. So very back and forth. The Jets prevailed 4-3 in overtime, but how they got there, I think, is very interesting. We'll chat about that in just a quick moment, but before we go any further, wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, the Jets won a tight game in Seattle on the road, one of the few road games to start the season, and the Jets pulled it off. It was a really close game, very back and forth. I will say that, generally speaking, I would say Seattle probably had the edge in this game by enough of a margin to be noticeable. Certainly, the expected goal counts look pretty in favor of the Kraken by a margin. But I would say, this was a game that kind of had a couple of different phases, right? The first period, the Jets were definitely very much outplayed. Winnipeg really struggled to get anything going. And, I think some of the totals and early numbers and figures from the first period maybe don't paint just how rough it was for Winnipeg to try and get out of its own end. And, the Kraken were just swarming. It was tough for the Jets, and Seattle ended up striking first. I think it was Matty Beniers who got him on the board first. Tough, right? But, the Jets, I would say, it was a bit of a learning period. Obviously, Winnipeg, was probably hoping to not start down again like they have in some of the previous games. But it is what it is. Sometimes you just gotta buckle down and basically get through a rough stretch. And I think that was this first period, which really showcased what I thought would happen in this game. Seattle's very fast, they're skilled, and they're pesky down low. All of the lines except for the depth lines really struggled with this. The Nemestikov and Scheifele lines really had a rough outing, which, not super shocking. The Scheifele line more so than everyone else. They were just, I'll be honest, they were just bad. But we'll talk a little bit specifically about their performance to start the season a little bit later. But I will say there is one exception that I want to give credit for on this line. I thought Kyle Connor played one of his most complete games this season. He actually had on one of the biggest goals of the game. At the time, it was the go-ahead goal for Gabriel Vilardi. It was his second time doing this in this game, if I recall correctly, but he basically intercepted an exit near Seattle's blue line and forced the puck back in on a forced turnover, and that directly led to a Scheifele to Vilardi beautiful goal, and another great individual effort. And then in overtime, he had a ton of jump, a ton of hustle. He was very physical along the walls. This was like this was Connor being his most engaged. And I think this year he's really actively trying to back check more. He's trying to make more plays. And if he just does that, that's all I would ever really ask. I know he's never going to be a defensive stalwart, but just doing this stuff, sometimes it makes a really big difference. In those moment-to-moment plays, maybe when your line's getting killed out there, you need a break somewhere. He makes one of those little puck thieving moments, and it just changes the landscape of a shift completely. So I wanted to really spotlight him. He was not named one of tonight's stars, but I would actually name him, in my personal opinion, he deserved, if you're just talking for the Jets, a star for his performance. I thought he played a really strong game by, what we were looking for from this first line. And I thought between him, Velarde, and Scheifele, he easily outshone his line mates, even with Velarde actually recording the goal. Other observations, I would say, Niederreiter had a monster game, and that really follows the Lowry line just being absolutely crushing. They were amazing tonight. The Lowry line, the only thing that they ever really lack for is just goals. I mean, like, they do everything else so well. Tonight, they, actually got a deflection. Niederreiter deflected an Appleton shot from the right circle just about, and it sort of deflected off Niederreiter at first. The Kraken thought it might be, kicked in, but no, it just deflected off of him. Clean goal. And then the Jets kind of conceded not too long after on what the Kraken were pretty sure was going to be a goal. It was a bad line change, stretch pass to the neutral zone, caught Winnipeg, and Stanley and Pionk just happened to be on the same shift together, and that didn't exactly go well when the Kraken carved him up in front of the net. But thanks to Gord kind of getting too involved physically with Hellebuck, got waved off. So a bit of a break. But Niederreiter had 2 goals tonight. His second goal was off of a phenomenal transition and pass from Perfetti. He had a nice scramble up the left wall, which he's not the fastest, so I call it a scramble. It was probably more of a strong glide, but then he worked below the goal line and fed Niederreiter a pitch perfect pass. Beautiful goal, and you really can't hate it, man. And Perfetti, I'm telling you, man, I knew coming into the season this was going to be a big year for him, and so far he has done nothing but just prove me right. And I think a lot of us were probably thinking, he's going to be expensive pretty soon. But, man, already almost a point per game this season. Let's hope he keeps it up, because it's been really baller to see him doing well. Other fun things, obviously the overtime goal, that was really cool. I know the end of the game was a little bit rough when Seattle was really pressing and the Jets were kind of getting dummied. I know Beniers got his second of the game and tied it, but thankfully, again, thanks to efforts from, Connor to really hustle around the offensive zone, he created space and time, kind of doing what Nick Ehlers does when he's inside the OZ, kept an OT shift alive where it was a delayed penalty call. Ehlers comes on the ice, becomes kind of the trailer on the left faceoff circle and squeezes one through to Cord. And just like that, the Jets are now 7-0-0, which, look, you can certainly be a little worried about how they're getting there. And I think that that's very fair. And I'm right there with you. By the same token, it's also just really fun that the Jets are 7-0-0. It's not often that you'll ever see a start like this from this team. First time they've ever done something like this before at the start of the year. They've had, 7-8 game winning streaks in the past. I mean, they had one last year, but to do it from game one is something the Jets have never done. So in that respect, I think a lot of players really deserve credit. One in particular, Connor Hellebuck. I know he surrendered 3 goals, but I mean, he really bailed out the Jets on a number of huge saves tonight. I thought he was great. I thought he really handled the pressure well because, Seattle was swarming, and I'll be honest, our defense was not so good. And I do want to talk about a particular problem with the Jets' top pairing that I think is starting to show up in the last couple of games. It is a bit worrying. I'm hoping it's just a temporary blip, but something to keep track of, and we'll chat about that later this episode. But big 4-3 win. Now the Jets go on the road to Calgary, which will be fun. The Flames, I think, actually lost for a rare moment again. They haven't really lost many games this season. I think this is like maybe their second or something like that. But Calgary, I think, no one really expected them to be in this position, but they're leading the Pacific. And, they've played pretty fun hockey. So the Jets are not going to have an easy out there. But we'll chat about that game on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, though, I did want to spend a little bit talking about the top line because it continues to be an issue. And I think we saw in a lot of ways why, in my mind, the sum of the parts is actually less than the individual parts with this particular trio. We'll chat about that in just a quick moment. But before we go any further, I did want to give our thanks to our friends and partners at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Obviously, the first 7 weeks have been crazy. Week 8 is finally starting off, with Thursday Night Football. Huge game between the Rams and Vikings just finished. The Rams with a rather big win, although there was a lot of controversy on what looked like a pretty clear face mask on Sam Darnold. But it is what it is. Adversity sometimes makes you stronger, and I'm sure the Vikings will feel like this was, something to have a bit of a chip on your shoulder going forward. But for me as a Ravens fan, I'm hoping for a big win in Cleveland. We're going to face Jameis Winston. Good Lord, that man is crazy and says some wild things. But maybe you're watching one of these games and you get a bit of a hunch and you're thinking, you know what? I want to follow up on that hunch. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets with FanDuel. You'll even get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all at FanDuel.com. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're following up on some interesting things from the first few games. Obviously, the Jets have played now 7 games. They're rocking a perfect record with some imperfect play, and I think that that's a rather salient point because what we're about to chat about is the Jets' top line, which in tonight's game against the Kraken, they were, well, I'll be honest, not so good. Now, I don't think that is fair to say of every single player on this line, but the whole, generally speaking, I'll be honest, that line got demolished. Connor Scheifele and Velarde they don't gel together. And I think there's like a couple of stylistic things that happen. The first thing is that Scheifele, I think, wants to be the driver of this line, and he really hasn't been to start the season. He's one of those guys who I think is like an elite complementary player, and when you give him the right line mates, his true individual talents and ability to be an unholy menace in the offensive zone really start to show. But I think he wants to be the guy driving everything, and he just really hasn't been. I think, in this game, he really was more of a passenger, I hate to say, but I didn't really notice him. And on the few plays that were really good that he made, obviously, the pass to Velarde was nice and everything. But on the whole, Scheifele just wasn't really that noticeable. And I think that's why he doesn't really want to play with Ehlers. Ehlers is going to be the dominant puck carrier. He's going to be the guy driving all of that line's offense. And I think that probably feels to some degree like, it's a little maybe unseemly. And I think Scheifele wants to, kind of like Wheeler did back in the day, be the on-ice leader. But in this game, I don't think he really showed us that level of play. I want him to, and I think that there's a version of him that's capable of it. But like this game just wasn't it. And Velarde, I think, has kind of looked a little bit in a fog. This line is just not really gelling. It didn't really work that well last year, and I feel like it's just continuing to have some of the same issues that it did in the previous seasons. So I will say, for me, Connor really stood out positively. I know that I've been harsh on Connor in the past, but I thought, and I continue to think this through the first few games, he looks like the guy with some of the most jump on the line. I think he's really trying to drive play. I think he's really trying to create. It's why I actually think he deserves to play with a different group. I think if you put him with Perfetti, I think the way that they see the ice and how they play together just aligns so much more naturally. I know that Arneal probably doesn't love the optics, and Scheifele probably doesn't either, and maybe Connor doesn't either to a degree. But I think if you want to make the most of these line matchups and how their skill sets sort of gel together, getting Connor away from Scheifele, I think, would do everyone good. If you have to have them together, absolutely, then just put Ehlers up there instead of Velarde. Gabriel looks out of place, and I think he's really struggled to make an impact the way that he wants to. And so maybe playing on a line that's a little heavier, a little slower, and maybe more methodical in the way that Perfetti and Nemesnikov might be, could actually work to Velarde's benefit. So, I think there's like a multi-cascading effect here of making some simple changes to the line combos that could benefit everyone. And the reason that I think the top line is so crucial for the Jets to deal with is because this is supposed to be your breadwinner. They're playing 20-plus minutes a night. They are eating some of your hardest matchups, and you can't trust them with it. They don't really seem to be doing all that well as a unit. There was actually a time later in the third period where, and this was funny because they weren't even on the ice. Like this goal against that they were on the ice for wasn't even really their fault, but because they'd already been on the ice for another one, and I think they maybe had a turnover or something in the neutral zone off of a really bad Neil Pionk pass up the gut. I think they kind of got blamed for it a little bit, but they actually did get benched for a shift, which I haven't seen previous Jets coaches really do. So obviously, it's not just us that's seeing this. Arneal is too. And I sort of wonder how much longer he's going to let this line continue to just not look good. If you make that swap with Ehlers and either Velarde or Connor, I think everyone will feel a little bit more at ease. I think you'll have better playing lines, and I think your top nine will look a little more balanced. Right now, the Lowry line's literally being asked to carry everything. They're doing about as much as you could possibly ask them to. They've been tremendous to start the season, but they're just not supposed to be your lead scorers. That's too much to ask of them on a continuous basis. I think that they're an amazing, amazing matchup line and that they can offer you supplementary offense, but asking them to carry all of it is not really how you want this team to play. And I think that the deeper you go in the season and into the playoffs, that's where that sort of stuff comes to be a bit of a problem. So, the Jets have plenty of time to sort this out, but I think they need to start thinking about how you get the first line going, and really what you do with the Nemesnikov line, because what you do with the first line probably impacts that as well. The Nemesnikov line wasn't as bad, but they still gave up some really, really, really dangerous chances right up the slot in front of Hellebuck, so I didn't love their game. The good news is that they still have the individual talent apart to make a difference, but I think this game kind of showed again why the way that the lines are arranged for the Jets outside of the Lowry line and the Kupari line, which I think did a really good job forechecking and sort of tiring the Kraken out. It just wasn't 100% optimized the way that you would like. So for Winnipeg, it's not like it's, code red alarm kind of stuff yet with the Jets, because, they have a really good record. They've built themselves a 14-point cushion early on. So it's not like, they have to make an adjustment right now. But I think I would start thinking about it. The earlier that you make the switch and get everybody comfortable with it, I think the better off you'll be later in the season. I don't know if Arneal sees it, but I hope he does, because the top line continuing as is, it's just not going to work for the remainder of the year. I'd love for them to play like they did on some of those shifts where they, won the battles along the wall, grinded out offensive zone possession, won puck battles, forced turnovers, did all that stuff. That's what I've been begging for, but they don't do it enough. And I think that is where it continues to be a problem. One of the biggest things you'll notice is that they're just slow. They're not a fast line. And when you're matching up against the McKinnons of the world, the McDavids, those guys with a ton of speed, their teams may be struggling right now, but, down the road, maybe they start to pick things up and you face those kinds of opponents in the playoffs, and it's going to be a tough battle for the top line that, again, I don't think they're going to be able to win as constructed. And, if you make the switch and it doesn't work, then fine, feel free to go back to what you feel is best. But I have a suspicion and a feeling that if you make this change that I'm, really pushing for, and you experiment with the top line, I think you're going to reap some really good benefits. I think this team really needs to reconfigure their top nine, because right now, it's just going to mess with other matchups. It's going to make these games really hard, and you're facing teams like Seattle in the playoffs. The regular season, you'll see a whole variety, but once you make the postseason, you're just facing quality opponents, and some of them play this style of speedy, countery kind of hockey that always gives the Jets fits. And I don't want to say Winnipeg's at a big disadvantage in these kinds of series, but they kind of are. They're not a rope-a-dope counter kind of team. Winnipeg is a more methodical, more forechecking oriented squad. They don't have, elite game breakers all up and down the lineup. They've got a few of them in key positions, but it's not enough to surmount some of these teams that, play such an up-tempo style that, Winnipeg really doesn't get to show its quality when it's constantly spending all of its time in the defensive zone. So there's a lot of food for thought with this. And I think the Jets, if they really want to prove that the, data science side is being used, and they really want to show that they're thinking about things, then you might start considering making some of these switches here in the near future. Because I think if you keep going as is, it's only going to put this team behind the eight ball at some point later in the season, whether it's in the regular season or in the playoffs. At some point, I think it will catch up. And I'm not trying to be like a doomer. I'm far from, trying to sound like that in this case, but I just think it's a realist assessment that, how the Jets have won so far is probably not the most sustainable way to go about it. It's been really fun, I'll tell you that, but I can already see how things end, by the time you hit April, May. And, the second half of the season, anyways, is always a bit of a challenge for the Jets as it is. So the more that you can get right now, the better off you will be. But, we are on a 7-game win streak, so I also very much want to acknowledge how fun and cool that is. I think it's certainly worth celebrating, but there is one other thing that's a little bit concerning, and it's been a noticeable trend the last few games. I didn't think it would be a problem this year, but it seems like Morrissey and DeMello might not be working. We'll chat about that in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, did want to mention our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you know that, well, when you buy a ticket, you go to checkout, and that $20 or $30 ticket suddenly looks more like $50 or $60. And you might be thinking, did I buy an extra ticket? But no, you just got hit with a bunch of fees and charges that aren't shown up front. Gametime totally gets your pain. They hate it too. And that's why they allow you to toggle on all-in pricing, which once you switch it on, you'll get to see everything you're paying up front without any of the hassle and hidden fees. And they even have a brand new feature called Gametime Picks that filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on the hottest seats. They even offer you seat views before you buy, because no one wants to pay a bunch of money and find out that you're kind of sitting in an obstructed zone. Maybe the view kind of sucks. Maybe you didn't know it was going to be this limited. And Gametime doesn't want you to be surprised. They also offer you a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. They're so confident you're not going to find a better deal elsewhere that if you do happen to locate a better price, they will credit you 110% of the difference. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Also wanted to give a wonderful shout out to our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. They help make daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. All you have to do is just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win 100 times your cash. And, PrizePicks offers some great features. They always put their members first, so all withdrawals are safe, secure, and fast. When your picks hit, you'll get your money in as little as 15 minutes. And if you're worried about your lineups when injuries hit, no worries. If you lose somebody in the middle of the game, your lineup will still stay live. And, of course, they have all sorts of great features. They have a flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. And you can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. It's why some of the world's biggest community members like Drewski, Joe Budden, and Sean O'Malley all play, and you can join them with their community picks tab each and every week. And of course, PrizePicks is available in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas, which I know for some of you is a little more relevant. Sign up today and you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's just straight up guaranteed. And if you're thinking about games this week, maybe you're thinking about putting up an over-under for goals between the Calgary Flames and Jets. I think this is going to be a close game, so maybe like 4.5 would be a good bet. I would say under, maybe. I think it's going to be a tight affair. Maybe over, actually, because I would imagine a 3-2 or 4-3 scoreline could be possible. These teams are going to be pretty tight. I think it's going to be an intense one, so maybe go the over on that one. But to do so, just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just wrapping up really quickly with some interesting thoughts coming from the first few games. Obviously, the Jets just beat the Kraken, but some of these themes are certainly echoed throughout the past couple of games. And one thing that's a little worrying is that Morrissey and DeMello do not appear to be doing so hot. This has been one of Winnipeg's worst defensive pairings. Sandberg and Pionk are actually, I would say, the Jets' strongest pairing right now. And Morrissey and DeMello, yeah, they might be cooked. I don't know if it's just DeMello maybe slowing down. Maybe it's the matchups. Whatever it is, DeMello looks like he's not 100%. Like he's made some really bad turnovers. He's missed some very clear reads. Just very uncharacteristic of him. He's had moments like this before where he'll have a slow start to the year and then he starts to ramp things up and you don't worry about it. He did it last year too. But last year he also had some bumps up and down in his game that looked like he was maybe starting to slow down a bit. So that for me is a little bit of a concern. And Morrissey not being able to carry that pairing is not great. I think Josh is mostly operating business as usual, but with the added caveat that the defensive coverages and stuff are not coming as easily as they did last year. So I'll be honest, if that continues, that's going to be a problem this year. The Jets don't really have many defensive reinforcements to help this team. And like we all know that Winnipeg's blue line already wasn't in the best shape, even if everyone played to the best of their ability. But if Josh and Dylan don't start to right the ship at some point this year, that's going to be a problem. I don't know if it's going to be something that I'm thinking about, permanently, but I do think, it being a thing over the first, 7 or so games and not just being a one-off, but happening continually, especially to the degree that it's happening where they're like at the bottom of the stat sheet each night. It's concerning. These guys are supposed to be eating your toughest matchups and really being your blue line leaders. And so far, it's kind of been the opposite. Contrasting them with Sandberg and Pionk, who, look, they do still concede a fair few number of chances, but because Sandberg is better in transition and offers a more stable two-way partnership with Pionk, Neal's offensive game has really blossomed again to where he's just basically acting as the fourth forward, right? That does mean that defensively he, has games like he did tonight where maybe he, how do I put this nicely, was a little bit less than perfect. He was like on the ice for almost all of Seattle's goals. And, he was also on the ice for a fair few chunk of Winnipeg's goals. So he is chaos incarnate, but that's just a part of his game that you sort of accept. Sandberg and Pionk working well together, I think is great. Stanley and Miller, not so great. That pairing, Stanley's just, bless Logan, he really tries. And I know he just came back from surgery, but I think we all kind of know what Stanley is at this point. And, once Hanola comes back, I think that will be, a real boost to the puck moving ability on the back end. But I honestly would have even taken Fleury. I think Fleury did enough to earn a spot and was actually doing fairly well alongside Miller. So, I know why you want to put Stanley in, but might not have made that choice. But more importantly, the Jets have got to figure out what's going on with the first pairing, and they've got to keep them off the ice when the first line is out there. The first line plus the first pairing, bad mix, very bad. You have two defensively struggling groups, and they're not creating a lot offensively. Not a good recipe for happiness if they're on the ice together. So, yeah, this team is certainly, dealing with a strong record, but I think these early red flags kind of tell me some things that are a little bit, concerning for the future. Stuff like this, especially with a Jets team that doesn't have loads of offensive or defensive depth the same way that like top end teams do. It's a bit of a challenge. And I think the Jets can put themselves in a much better state and maybe take off pressure from some of the other lines and deep pairings if they just reconfigure their top nine. You do that, I think your life gets a lot easier. And maybe it'll also help Morrissey and DeMello spend less time in their own end. I can't guarantee it's going to work out, but I think it'd be nice if the Jets at least tried. I want to know that it at least, doesn't work before I say the Jets should go back to what they're doing. Because what they're doing right now doesn't really work in the long run either. It's getting them through these games so far, but I think Hellebuck's probably masking a lot of Winnipeg's bigger issues. So, this reminds me of where Winnipeg was a few years ago under Maurice, but, I guess there's still time to fix things, and I hope the Jets are at least considering it. But let me know what you think of their start to the season so far. Drop your comments below. We're at my social media as @HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day. We'll be back here tomorrow with a preview of Winnipeg versus Calgary, but like I said, that's all the time we've got. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.